Good morning and welcome. And I can see Gavin's there. Can you hear us all right? Okay, thank you. Well, welcome to everybody. Obviously, we're live streaming, and in the absence of Colin, I'm chairing the meeting today. We'll just go through the normal sort of ticks, etc. Emergency evacuation. I don't think we're going to have any sort of fire alarm this morning, like that, are we?
No.
And as I said, apologies for absence. Colin's not with us today. Neither is sends his apologies. Keith Wilkinson and Patrick James. Thank you. We've had a copy of the minutes. I suppose everyone's had a chance to read them. Does anyone want to make any comment? Are we happy to take them as read and approve them?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, we've got on agenda 5, any personal prejudice or interests. There's a form there on the table if anybody needs to do that. I don't think we have anything today, have we? Okay, thank you. Right, are we all, you can hear us, Gavin, so would you like to get, it goes through the report, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just checking that you can hear me okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, well, good, Gavin.
So good morning, everybody. This is a verbal update on the status of the 24-25 audit. We're actually busy with the audit at the moment. We've been working on it for a few weeks now, and we'll be bringing our sort of final reports and findings to the meeting in December. I think, is that a full authority meeting? I believe it might be. So the two reports that you'll receive at that meeting are our audit completion report, which will summarise in the main the findings from the work that we've done on the statement of accounts for 24/5, and the draft auditor's annual report will also be taken to that meeting, and that includes our value for money commentary, the commentary on what we think of your arrangements to secure economy efficiency and effectiveness in the use of resources. We have actually completed the work on your value for money arrangements. So as part of that, we look at financial sustainability, we look at your governance arrangements, and we look at what we describe as arrangements to improve economy efficiency and effectiveness, which includes a number of things, but it looks at your arrangements not just to manage the financial position, but to manage operational performance. We look at how you work in partnership with other bodies, and we look at your procurement arrangements as part of that. Based on the work we've done to date, and we would always reserve the right to be able to update our findings at any time up to the point that we give the opinion on the financial statements. But on the basis of our work to date, there are no exceptions identified. We don't give an overall view. We report by exception. We report if we've identified any significant weaknesses in your arrangements. We haven't identified any significant weaknesses at all. So our commentary will be a commentary on the arrangements that you have in place. We recognise that you're operating in a difficult environment, but our view is that you're doing everything possible to manage that in those difficult circumstances. And when I talk about a difficult environment, I'm talking about the financial position, and the sort of status of your sort of funding arrangements with DEFRA, and the lack of having at the moment at least a medium-term sort of picture of funding from DEFRA, and the reduction that you've experienced in revenue funding, albeit with an increase in capital funding. It is quite a difficult situation to manage increased capital spend if you don't have the sort of revenue spend to support the authority as well. So those are the kind of things that we mention in our draft auditor's annual report. In fact, we've got a new requirement this year that we have to circulate a draft of the auditor's annual report by the end of November. So we will be, we've given management a draft. Management are considering that draft at the moment. When we've heard from management on their views on the draft, we'll be sharing that with members of the committee. before the end of November, so that we have met the new requirement that we have to share it with members before the end of November. So we'll be doing that in the next week or so, hopefully. But it'll be updated once again before the meeting in December, where the accounts are considered and approved. But you will get a copy by email. That's what we're proposing to do before the end of November. In terms of the audit of the financial statements themselves, that is going very much to plan. We really appreciate the cooperation that we get from management, from Pete, from Sandra, and also the sort of wider finance team. We recognise it's quite a big pressure having an audit of this nature undertaken, and we're really appreciative of the cooperation that we get and the support that we get in carrying out our work. We can only do the audit and do it efficiently and effectively if we have that management cooperation, and I'm pleased to say that we do have it. And we're really sort of grateful for that. And at the moment, there are no significant issues coming out of the audit. It's just there's a lot of work to do and a lot of things to go through, but there are no sort of significant issues arising. And what is particularly pleasing is the points that we raised with management last year, particularly around valuations and around including the annual government statement in the draft financial statements that are published at the end of June. Those have all been actioned in the arrangements that you've had in place this year. So we're very pleased with the progress of the audit, and we look forward to reporting in full in December. The final thing I just wanted to mention is that I've recently told management that this is going to be my final audit year, because I've decided to retire. Clearly everybody is telling me I don't look old enough to retire, but I am, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be retiring at the end of March, so plenty of time to complete the 24-25 audit, get that all signed off satisfactorily, and hand over to a new engagement lead before that I leave at the end of March next year. So, Chair, that's all I wanted to say. I'm quite happy to seek to answer any questions that anybody may have, or sort of listen to any comments. And I will just say that after my item, I'm going to leave the call and just watch the meeting on the live stream, if that's okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Gavin, for that. Right, members, have you any questions you'd like to raise? Yeah, okay. Thanks, Malcolm.
There's no question there.
Okay.
Malcolm.
Okay. No, it wasn't a question. I mean, it just sounds as though things are going very well, and as usual, there's good relationships between our officers and the auditors, which, as you say, Gavin, is absolutely critical, isn't it? So thanks, thanks very much for that, and all the best in your retirement. We'll talk before then.
It's appreciated. It's going to be pretty busy until I go, but I'm looking forward to a long rest.
Thanks, Gavin. Yeah, well, just to yeah, there's another one I could use. Thanks. Right, thanks, Gavin. Yeah, just to reiterate what's been said by Malcolm. I mean, obviously, we're going in the right direction. It's good to hear that, you know, that we're doing the right things despite challenges, that we seem to be, you know, having enough things in place to be able to manage our finances, and which is what we want to hear. This is probably not going to be more directed at Tom, but it's the fact is this new requirement. Obviously, we're halfway through November. It's got to be out to members before the end of November. I think possibly it's something we're going to have to manage to make sure that it's a new thing for members, to make them aware of it, and maybe we're going to have do we have to respond back to them, and maybe we're going to have to sort that out ourselves, really, this new requirement.
I mean, Pete will pick me up if I've got this wrong, but it's been circulated with management, which means officers to review. So it's with Pete to review, so that we can ensure that the final audit statement and VFM report can be submitted in time for the National Park Authority meeting on the 12th of December, I think it is. So I'm confident that we'll be well in time so that members can consider the report with under Gavin's expert guidance at the meeting in December.
Thank you. Just wanted to confirm that members don't have to actually agree on that.
Gavin goes.
Yeah. So you said the members will get a copy of it. I wasn't sure whether members had to agree before management, but as I said, that's probably an internal thing. Thank you.
Could I maybe just help clarify that? It's a technical requirement that we need to share the draft report with members before the end of November, which means that it's shared with you. It doesn't have to be agreed. It sits as a draft report. It'll continue to sit as a draft report when it goes to the authority in December, and it'll only be finalised when we've actually signed off on the financial statements, which will also hopefully be around the time of the authority meeting in December, subject to everything being finalised and in place. It's not something you need to agree at this point. It's just we are required to make you aware of it, which is the reason why it will be circulated to you before the end of November. Nothing's going to change really in relation to the value for money commentary. So I'm not asking you to sort of fully read these reports once, twice, three times. It's if you read it, the VFM commentary will be largely the way it'll be in the final version. So you only need to read that section once really. But there'll be opportunity for it to be discussed at the authority meeting, and members at the authority meeting will be able to raise anything that they want to raise in relation to the content of the report. We're just trying to fulfil this requirement, which is a new one, that auditors have to issue auditors' annual reports by the end of November every year, whether they've finished the audit or not. And in circumstances where they aren't finished the audit, they have to sort of update the report, which is what we're planning to do. So I hope that makes it clearer than I sort of made it the first time round.
Thanks. I think George would like to ask a question.
By any chance using this? No. Okay, thank you for this. So just to clarify, the actual meeting is on the 15th of December, and which is a Monday, and then the papers will be issued to members normally 5 clear days before, so that takes us to the 5th of December. So I'm assuming that from officers' perspective or from your perspective, we will have everything in that pack ready for us on the 5th of November, of the 5th of December, to review ahead of the 15th of December. Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. That's definitely the plan, is to do that. What you'll find when you get the draft auditor's annual report before the end of November is it won't have the findings from the accounts audit because we haven't written all those up and completed it yet. But we hope by the time it goes to the meeting in December that that content will be there.
Yes, you'll have 5 extra days between the end of November and the 5th of December.
Not sure on the exact dates, but we'll be certainly seeking to meet all the sort of time and requirements for the release of our reports. I mean, we are drafting the other report, the audit completion report. We're starting to draft that this week based on our findings to date, and then we have audit work that is continuing and we need to complete. But I don't see any problem with meeting the timetable as has been set out.
Okay.
Thank you for this.
Sorry, Jane would like, yes, Jane, sorry.
Thank you. I know that in the past the pensions have been a bit of a problem for the audit going out. Are the pensions not going to cause a problem this year?
Yeah, good point. We haven't got the pension fund assurance letter yet. We're hoping that we will get it in time for the authority meeting in December, and it won't hold up our sort of sign off of the financial statements. If we don't have it, you can still go ahead at that authority meeting and improve the financial statements, and we will just sign our audit opinion when we receive the pension fund auditor assurance. But I'm hopeful that everything will be in place and we can sign everything off at the authority meeting. That's what I'm hoping for. I'll bring my special signing pen to the meeting. So if we do have the pension fund audit assurance and you do approve your accounts, I could be able to sign the audit report while I'm there at the meeting. That would be the ideal situation. And then we can all move on and the audit's complete.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, Gavin. I mean, you might get a new pen when you retire, but fetch your pen you've got anyway. But you're not going yet. So thank you very much for the presentation, and we'll look forward to reports coming through. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm gonna leave this stream, but I am watching the rest of the meeting on the sort of live stream that you've got set up. So thank you and goodbye, everybody,
Thank
and best wishes. Thank you. Bye.
Right, thank you. Right, Pete, it's over to you now on the draft medium-term financial strategy. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. There's a presentation for this coming up shortly. So I'm hoping I can flick through it. So, yeah, I was going to say, is there any way of making the actual presentation? There we go. Okay, so some of these slides will be familiar to people who've been in this meeting before for the MTFS, but I always do put the first ones up. Just around how we actually do our MTFS and budget process here. So in November, we bring a draft medium-term financial strategy paper to this meeting as a draft for comment by members here to go to full sort of approval of that in December at National Park Authority Committee. The medium-term financial strategy is quite a broad view of the 5 years ahead. So it doesn't go into the detail that the detailed budget will when we bring that in February and March, but it looks broadly at a number of assumptions to see in the 5 years coming up whether we've got any particular concerns, broadly what are overall sort of challenges financially, and it just helps to highlight sort of that really sort of longer look ahead so we can start strategically plan for the authority's financial position. So that's how it differs to the budget insofar as here we've got some very broad assumptions, a set of bottom line numbers for 5 years, and then when we come in February we do a really detailed deep dive on the 26-27 numbers for sign off in March. And then in terms of the business plan, so when we come to the meetings next month at December's NPA, we look at the business plan again and any reiterations of business plan targets, etc. And again, every year we look at both of these documents hand in hand, and the MTFS has to kind of underpin and financially be able to support the business plan that's delivered. And that's something that as officers we look at every time about whether or not actually as a financial position we can continue to deliver all the things we have in the business plan and make sure that the two don't fall out of sync with each other. And as we've mentioned before, the strategy continues to be about maximising our delivery from the available resources. So looking at how we can use each of our resource and income streams as best as possible to deliver the most outcomes we possibly can for the park. And actually where we can, grow those resources so that we can deliver more. This graph is the one that just looks at how those income sources have changed over time. It runs up to this current year. And we're really seeing at the moment, actually, when you look at the next 5 years as well, a bit of a plateauing out around the sort of 14 to 15 million pound mark in terms of the budget delivery. And at the moment, that feels a little bit where we're maxing out in terms of how much we can leverage our core resources to deliver those additional areas. You can see there in terms of Section 106, we've seen that growing over time, and now we've got the big 2 agreements in place. That's staying fairly static in the current years. But maybe the biggest change of all, which I'll come to in the slides, is around DEFRA and DEFRA's funding and how that's changing year on year at the moment. These 2 graphs here are just a little bit around economic outlook. So these 2 charts, the bottom one on the left is around economic growth, and the bottom one on the right is around inflation. And it just gives a little bit of kind of the trend of these 2 elements at the moment, which you'll hear a lot in the news at the moment, particularly with the budget coming up later this month, around that challenge of economic growth actually really putting a lot of pressure on the public purse. And that's a lot of the reasons why at the moment there's a lot of discussion around things like government spending, cuts to government spending and potential tax rises. And we've seen the impact of things like the spend pressures, but also things like NI last year, where we had to find an additional £125,000 for that increase in NI. So we do see a lot of those pressures coming through on our finances. And those graphs there really kind of give a little bit of indication of the challenges there. So the forecast for economic growth remains pretty low at the moment. That adds that extra pressure. And also in terms of inflation, in the bottom right graph, you can see that it was coming down, but now has remained fairly stubborn in recent months. So currently we've seen interest rates being sustained, but inflation being a little bit stubborn to get down to that 2% government target mark. And that's now delayed, and the expectation in the forecast is for that to come down to 2%, but likely much later in 26, 27. So in terms of the growth strategy, that remains the same as we've discussed before. So our business as usual is continuing to look for savings and efficiencies, continuing to use our resources best we can to deliver. And that continues to be our sort of business as usual, what we do on a day-to-day basis, and officers are well versed and staff across the organisation are well versed at doing that within their budgets. But the reality of trying to grow is going to come through increasing earned income. So we've done quite a lot in that area around our car parks, around retail strategy and things like that to try to really generate the most that we can. But also that external funding pipeline and the importance of that. And of course, the report that we bring to this meeting each quarter looking at that external funding pipeline is a big part of the strategic need to address that and generate as much of external funding as we can. And they're realistically the areas where we're going to be able to deliver more on the resources that will give us that avenue. But there's a reality that if we do start to be able to not be able to grow resources or generate through those sources, then there's a reality that we'll have to manage decline to some extent. So at the moment, as you can see, in total resources terms, we're at about 14, 15 million. But if we can't continue to grow, then there'll be some degree to which we have to sort of cap that. And indeed manage decline if we end up having reduced DEFRA resources centrally. So DEFRA grant normally when I come to this meeting is about talking about how it's been flat cash for years and we're expecting it to be flat cash again. But actually, we currently have no view at all of what it's going to be. We know DEFRA are having discussions internally, but at the moment we have no view, and it's becoming more difficult to predict actually because of the capital element that's come in. So what we have seen is instead of just getting that flat cash position we had for so long, we're now seeing revenue being reduced, capital being introduced. But actually capital, we had a 1.5 million injection of capital in 25, 26, but there's no indication of whether that's going to continue into future years. We suspect it might, but we have no clear view at all. Last year, so at the moment we're hoping we might get a 3-year settlement. That will at least allow us to do some sort of strategic planning for 3 years. We've worked for a long time now on 1-year settlements right at the end of the year that gives no ability to actually plan. So regardless of what we get, at least if we get a 3-year settlement, we can do real strategic, proper long-term planning or medium-term planning. But there's a real question about whether we're going to increase flat cash or cuts. And I think this graph here just helps to illustrate a little bit of how that's changed over time. So you can see initially we've had that change in grants, and actually everything was defined as revenue grants. The reality is we did spend some capital elements out of it, but it was all defined as revenue grant for a long time. You can see then we've started to see, we had 3 years where it stayed as flat cash. We had 1 year where we had that 500k one-off additional injection before it went back to flat cash. Then this year we've then had a little bit of capital, and then again you can see that really big 25, 26, 1.5 million injection of capital, but quite a big reduction in revenue. And that's making it really hard to plan in these reports about what we're going to get. I think in the report what we've done is assume that we will get for the mid case a flat cash revenue settlement, so that including the 8.3% cut, and a capital element that will effectively cover that 8.3% cut we had last year. So in effect, a flat cash back to 24-25, but with a capital element included. But it is really hard, and you'll see in the report actually there's a lot more scenario planning around that DEFRA grant than we've done before in the NTFS in recent years. External funding, so this graph, stealing Ellen's glory a little bit, but it's taken from the report later in the agenda around the pipeline. So again, it's just the importance of really looking for those opportunities and really managing that pipeline into the future. But we also need to make sure the core, so the corporate core, etc., is resourced appropriately as well to be able to deliver that. And there are areas of the organisation that are getting very stretched at the moment. And that risk of failure, so making sure that we don't have too much pipeline and we can't deliver. So we've got to get the balance right of actually not overstretching ourselves, getting too many resources in and actually not being able to deliver the project because we don't have the resource in place. So it's really managing that balance all the time. And I think there's illustrations in the quarterly reporting that we're doing that quite well at the moment. We had that year where we had a large underspend at the end of the year. Last year we spent up to the 15 million, and this year again we're on track at the moment. And again, it's the only real option really is this pipeline and managing this pipeline to increase that output for the national park and continue that growth and the ability to really deliver as many outcomes as we can. Earned income. So this graph just illustrates where our earned income comes from, and I think what it does illustrate is the importance of car parking in terms of our earned income numbers. So the budget at the moment is 1.8 million, and about half of that comes from car parks. The numbers there are, you'll notice, are minuses, but that's because the finance system throws out income as minuses. It's a credit in the finance system. It's just not been reversed. So I'll pick that up for the final one, but it does give the percentages of the income there. And what we need to do is maximise the assets that we have, which we're doing really well. Things like the evidence of Newton under Rosebery and Sutton Bank doing really well later on in this agenda under Q2 is evidence of that. And increasing fees for inflation, which we need to make sure that our fees do continue to stay with inflation. And then new initiatives as well. It's worth noting that new initiatives often need capital injections. So actually to be able to do brand new things, whether it be new car parks or extend car parks or bring in whole new facilities and visitor centres, does require capital injections, whether that comes from external funding or other sources.
Sorry to interrupt you. Can I just ask on the assets?
Yeah.
Obviously, those aren't retail or car parks. What are those other assets that are bringing in 5%?
Yes, that's well, Levisham is probably quite a large part of that. So Levisham Estate brings in a number of income streams, and we also have small amounts of income from this building for the rents that we make from Helmsley Town Council and Howardian Hills. So it's some of those other small areas outside of those the main bulk.
Thank you.
So this slide just goes through some of the main risks and key financial assumptions that we built into the report. So pay inflation is obviously one of our very biggest numbers. Another one that we don't have a view on for next year yet. So we don't have any indication of either what the offer is or the union ask in terms of pay inflation. However, what we did have is we had it returning back to 2% because of the way we expected inflation to go last year, when we did it last year. Actually, you've seen in the chart that inflation at the moment is very stubborn. So we've actually gone with 3%. So there is actually an extra impact in here based on for 26-27 compared to last year. It's an extra 1% assumed. And that's very much in line with what other national parks are assuming as well for pay at this stage. And then it goes back to 2% thereafter, but I think it does illustrate that risk for us, that if inflation doesn't come down as it's expected, then that risk might again be in further years as well. And then pension savings mentioned there as well. So we've got our triennial valuation. So every 3 years the pension gets revalued. We've just had our first draft meeting of that last week, and all indications are very positive at the moment. So the pension fund is performing extremely well, both in its assets, but also some of the liability assumptions as well have really been in our favour. So we are expecting the pension rate to come down and generate quite a substantial saving. There will be something to discuss at December's paper when that becomes a bit clearer around how we address that saving. So you have a primary and a secondary rate within pension. I'll discuss that further at December, but effectively a secondary rate is to recover the surplus. But in 3 years' time, we might see it go back up to the primary rate. So we just have to manage that we may for 3 years have a very big saving, but see that go back up in 3 years. And for those of you that have been on the committee for quite a while, you remember that discussion with Jeremy Walker 6 years ago when we did have quite a lot of unpredictability in the pension and we created a reserve for that. I think that will be a part of a discussion for December when those numbers become clearer. But there is a small saving built in this current MTFS. Overhead inflation, also in line with that inflation target of 3%. So similarly, that was 2% last year, but up 3% in line with inflation being a bit stubborn. And then, as I've said, in the mid case, DEFRA funding, we've assumed that revenue will stay with that 8.3% cut that we received, but that we will get capital that places the equivalent of that 8.3% cut. So effectively flat cash compared to 2 years ago. Earned income's 1.9 million in the current MTFS. That's assuming inflation of fees. And external funding, £2.5 million target remains the same at the moment. And there is a discussion at some point strategically about whether we'd be more ambitious around that number. into future years. Interest remains capped at 2% on 4 million of cash. There's an assumption that cash will come down from its current position over time. So we cap that so that the budget is not too reliant on what is going to be temporary income. But that does mean we get sort of a windfall into reserves whilst rates remained higher than 2% of our cash balances remain higher than 4 million. Property, so at the moment there is obviously a property business case coming up, but there's no assumptions for that in here at the moment until that decision's made. But if so, it's likely that there may be some potential borrowing around what we do around property that might be built in into the future. So that's something that is on the horizon as a potential pressure, whether we sort of invest in this property or move to another. Both will require some degree of borrowing. So that pressure is not in the MTFS at the moment. It will be additional pressure at the point of that decision is made. Large capital projects we often refer to as a risk in here, and it's just the need to manage those very carefully. In many cases, if we had to say, for example, an overspend risk, that can fall to the authority. So it's really important that we manage those really carefully. Quite often those externally funded projects can be capital in the millions, and we need to make sure that any overspend risk is managed very carefully and it doesn't fall to the authority. So that's always in here for that reason. And then core resource squeeze. So the less revenue we get from DEFRA, the more squeeze there is on things like corporate resources and those which are essential for generating the external funding. And it's the constant beating of the drum with DEFRA that the recognition that actually DEFRA funding is essential to be able to leverage that external funding. So our ability to go out and deliver 15 million is really essential based on DEFRA funding really underpins that in terms of the corporate resources, etc., to be able to deliver. So that's the MTFS position. It's a bit of a bigger table than usual because of those extra scenarios underneath around the DEFRA grant. But based on the mid-case scenario, so that's getting a revenue grant, and they're the wrong way around actually, so I'll correct that. The revenue grant should be 4022 with a capital grant of 367. So that's effectively what I said before as being the 8.3% cut in revenue is retained in the revenue number, but the cap is replaced by capital, so effectively flat cash. Under that scenario, we've got £135,000 to find next year, and then that increases with each year based on that flat cash position. So again, it's the same scenario really after those years, that inflation versus flat cash DEFRA is the challenge. But underneath, you can see that we've actually scenario planning as well for potential cuts where we don't get any capital or where we retain some capital. And you can see that those scenarios can go up to a position of about 700,000. And that would be if we didn't receive any capital and we got a further revenue cut of 5%. So that's what we're operating as our worst case scenario. But at the moment, we really are working in a bit of a void. So deficits from 26-27 is actually under all scenarios. Previous years' budget assumptions are mostly accurate, apart from the inflation ones I've referred to already in that inflationary pressure. Deficit is mainly driven by flat cash DEFRA funding versus inflation in pay and overhead costs, but we are likely to see those pension savings with a modest savings level included in here, but more detail to come in December. No generic savings or income targets are built in, so we don't put in any kind of just generic salami slice saving that isn't adhered to something specific in delivery. And the MTFS indicates that overall delivery is likely to remain static at 14 to 15 million without strategic change. And that's all about if DEFRA grant doesn't increase in line with inflation, that challenge of really being able to leverage more funding than that at the moment without putting too much stresses on those kind of core and central resources. Reserves are all ring-fenced or earmarked, so funding through reserves is not a sustainable option. But there are risk reserves to help protect against short-term shocks and allow us to be strategic. And I think that's one of the key points here is that actually we have risk reserves in part, so we don't have to make knee-jerk decisions if we get late information about cuts. It does allow us to at least sort of take the short-term shock of that and make a decision in a strategic way. And that's one of the things for us to look at as well when we start to get more information about what that DEFRA position looks like. But at least it allows us not to be short-term in our decision-making and actually make any adjustments if we need to make some strategically. Just this table goes through key movements and mitigation year on year, so it just helps to understand where we've gone from last year to this year, so there's really key pressures in terms of 25, 26, and then going into 26, 27. And you can see the biggest one really is pay inflation and overhead inflation, so that's 3% on each of those. There's an element of interest that we expect to see a fall in interest rates as we see inflation start to decline. But there is a bit of an offset that we have a power saving with the utilities in the new agreement that we've just signed up to, and the pension costs. I know there's a nod to a pension saving there. I do expect it to be more extensive than that, but there'll be a decision for members to make around how we deploy that. Directors have begun to discuss scenarios, but without further information on those really key essential components, particularly grants, it's very challenging. Confidence that 26-27 deficit under the mid-case scenario of 135 can actually be mitigated, but other scenarios will be more challenging than that. So we think actually if the mid-case came true, we could find the 135 we need to find for next year. Beyond that, though, we'll need more discussions and more of a challenge. And mitigation measures will be in the detailed budget, so that'll be in February and March, but could include further utility savings potentially. So the new contract has just been signed. It could be higher than that, but equally we are putting solar power into our car parks and toilets this year through the DEFRA Capital Grant, which should generate some savings as well through that route. That's not included at the moment. Planning and car parking fee increases. So at the moment, I've not factored in anything for those at the moment. That'll be a detailed budget proposal. But we ought to look at whether we keep those going up in line with inflation, which is what we have said we would do before. Increased funding of core costs through external funding. So we need to have a really close look at the pipeline about which corporate costs and things can be funded through there, including our volunteer service as well, and how we get that more funded through our external funding channels. So that needs a little bit of work at looking at the pipeline for that. And then strategic changes in delivery towards project funding rather than core funds for some of those services. So again, that includes things like volunteers and outdoor learning and how we can get more project opportunities for some of those areas. And then consideration of the full impact of that pension rate change as well. So to conclude, challenging economic environment. I think all the headlines in the news at the moment and the budget statement really sort of point to that, with that lack of growth leading to pressure on both public services and potential tax rises as well. So all things to look for in the budget statement later this month, which I'll then feed into potentially the December paper if there's anything notable in there. MTFS indicates a deficit of 135,000 on the mid-case scenario, 26-27, increasing each year thereafter. And the driving factor is core grant versus pay and overhead inflation. No certainty at all yet on pay awards or core grant is making any kind of planning at the moment quite difficult. And mitigation discussions underway ahead of the detailed budget. Earned income growth supports core. So again, the importance of actually getting the most out of our assets and really getting that earned income, that helps support our core funding, our corporate services, etc. But they must be sufficient and prioritised to be able to deliver. So we are seeing some pressures within those core resource areas. We must make sure that they can actually sustain it, otherwise we run a risk of project failure. And not growing resources, again, means we need to manage decline. And then just a note on next steps. So the final version of this will come to NPA in December for approval. It's here for comment today. And then detailed budget in February for comments at that point before we do the final sign off at NPA in March. And then just a recommendation.
Thanks, Pete. That was a really an awful lot of work gone into that. Many thanks for that. Thank you. Right, members, would anybody like to ask questions? Hi, David.
Very briefly, just 1-2 points. Yes, I endorse your comments about Pete's report. Very comprehensive, and it's a warts and all, and it certainly puts us in a strong position as to how we're going to face the future. I think it's to be the staff to be commended in attracting so much project funding. I believe Pete made that we're looking for about £2.5 million, which is going a long way towards the sustainability of the national park. And I think our staff are to be commended for that. And I think coupled with the fact that if we get a good summer and increase in staycation holidays, we're going to see an increase in car parking and retailing. So I think those are two positive things. I don't think we can always rely on government in its widest sense to prop us. And I think if we can create our own luck, that's probably as much as we can do at the moment. But I'm quite optimistic at the moment.
Thanks, David.
Any other member?
Christine.
Oh, sorry, Christine. The change in seating arrangements to make I sat in the wrong
I'm
spot.
with you
You know,
there,
it's
aren't I?
thrown me off entirely. Yeah, thanks, Pete. I really appreciate the time and effort gone into it. So some real positives I picked up, changes from previous ones. I appreciate your acknowledging lines about the Section 106 being compensation, as always. I appreciate that. And also, you know, you've included percentages as well as figures in many cases, which we've asked for, and that was really helpful. There's a couple of little minor things, places where you've switched back and forth between using K for thousands versus not point something in millions. That makes it a little bit harder to read than it needs to be, which could be modified in the final report if you get a chance, but it's not major. I guess my main things and my main concern is we've used this 5% potential reduction as the worst case scenario. And having read a lot of stuff published around DEFRA's reductions in budgets and conversations happening with ALBs, I don't know how the park usually figures in those as a comparative, but their reductions are looking to be much more significant. So I don't want to be alarmist, but it's something that we need to think quite heavily about. What if the reductions were 15%, you know, which is a lot more than what you've been thinking about to date. I guess also around the capital side of things, yeah, it's great. I'm sure there's loads of things we could throw capital funding at, but when that's coming as a reduction of our bill, we might need to think about some different options. You know, is there any staff time we could capitalize? Are there other approaches we could take to capital besides just building investments that might help some of the pressures elsewhere? And as members, I would hope that's something that you would bring to us and we could have a bit of a conversation around, or at least, you know, to hear some of the thinking about if that's happening in the background. Yeah, and like I say, if there is a case for considering even worst case scenarios, you know, how we might help you, you know, as members, and having those conversations and thinking about how can we best manage those situations. So I appreciate the summary, but I feel quite disconnected from what that actually might imply, and just curious about when we might look at that more. You know, perhaps that's the February conversation when you actually know, but
Yeah, really good points, all of those. RDEL, CDEL is something we are getting used to at the moment, but capitalising salaries is absolutely one of the things we're discussing at length at the moment. The late notification we got on the 1.5 million meant we haven't got something in place for that yet, but we're looking at for next year. An expectation that capital will probably be a bit of the future at least. That CapExing salaries is going to be an essential part of that switch from RDEL to CDEL. This year, you'll remember that we brought an initial report in March budget, which had a 394k assumption for capital before we got the bigger injection. And of that, I think we had about 220k of natural capital, which we could switch from one to the other. It was already kind of capital in the grant that naturally moved across. But to get up to sort of a 394k number, we would have to consider things like capitalising salaries, absolutely. So I think up to 394k, which is that mid assumption, we think we can move across, including things like CapExing salaries, etc. But if it was more than that, so if we had a bigger cut in revenue and more capital, it would need strategic change beyond just CapExing salaries, which is similar to anything. I mean, even actually at the 5% cut level, it's a strategic change there as well. So I think, you know, at that sort of flat cash level, we can probably mitigate that. Anything up to 5%. So yeah, when you're talking 15%, it's absolutely valid to consider numbers. We've considered up to 10% in discussions. I would like to think, this might be the optimist in me, that we wouldn't get it you get it over a 3-year period and not have to do it within 3 months. But you're absolutely right that we have in mind as officers, in the back of our minds all the time, that we could get a radical cut, and that would mean radical circumstances that members would absolutely have to be a part of. We have started with members some of those annual strategic conversations, which have like one eye to that potential for strategic change. But clearly anything would have to be accelerated if we got exceptional bad news from DEFRA. Because I think anything above, I mean, at that flat cash level, we can deal with that. At 5%, at 2.5%, we could probably take our time a little bit. At 5%, we would absolutely have to strategically change with members, and we could possibly try to let reserves take some of the hits. We could do that properly. At 10, 15%, I imagine we would have to make some quite radical decisions with members. So it's absolutely very, very valid point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if other members would agree or not, but you know, in some ways it would be useful to get some of that preliminary thinking out on the table, so that if something did go badly wrong, we feel like we're kind of informed and a part of that conversation. Because I think, you know, once you've got the budget, and if it is bad, then we feel like, well, we've got to make a decision immediately, and we've not kind of had much preliminary build up to it. So
yeah,
anyway,
that's fine. I suspect Tom and Jim may want to come in too.
Jim, did you want to question?
Yeah, I do that.
Sorry.
There's
Sorry.
yeah, you plan, you hope for the best and plan for the worst. So absolutely. We've looked at a couple of scenarios that are kind of they're hypothetical, but they're informed hypothetical scenarios. We're not, to answer your first question, Christine, we're not an arm's length body, but in effect our core funding comes from our sponsoring department, and so we're in touch with our sponsorship team in DEFRA around their discussions that are taking place as part of departmental business planning. But I'm no clearer as to what the outcome of that will be. So I think you make a really good point that we ought to consider a worst scenario. And absolutely, we would need to engage members in having those discussions about the difficult choices that we would have to make as an organisation to be solvent in the long term. We need to think very carefully about the format for that, because I do not want to set hairs running. I want to be really ambitious about our opportunity to keep growing the authority and keep delivering more. But it would be foolish of me and anybody else to not consider that, given the circumstances of DEFRA's financial settlement back in the summer, what may or may not come out of the budget next week, to think that there could be some challenging times ahead.
Right, Jim.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Pete. Really good report, and I really enjoyed it, which is great for financial strategy. but it's sort of on the next item too. But this plots our course through around the snakes and the ladders. But the other side of this is output, isn't it? And which I know it's a huge sort of piece of work, and a different thing, but what is the output of our 15 million budget? And when we're sort of asking questions about, who are we, what are we really worth, and are we going to survive, and those things, and I think there are some big questions going about. Having an idea of what our output is, and I see ideally it's the value to the public of having a national park, and it's the value to the people who are part of the fabric of the national park in benefiting from that designation. I always like to see us delivering some of our work through local others. I mean, Fipple's a great example, but sometimes, the national park needs to have a sort of presence in the place so it's a national park. But if local contractors, local farmers, if people can deliver our work for us, then often that not only binds us into benefiting our place, but it actually saves us money too. And so I'm just wondering, there's a sort of mindset that the national park must do everything with its own staff and its own vans, And the other part of that is, so long as it's clearly identified as the national park's work, you know, are we doing that through other people? And I know it's a little bit of a challenge, but I just think, you know, having an idea of the value of our output to our management plan objectives is probably something we should be thinking about over the medium term.
Tom, do you want to come back?
Yeah, look, the recognising the value of our outputs, really important. I mean, back in December, we'll bring a 6-month review of our progress against our business plan, which is our contribution to the delivery of the National Park Management Plan, in which we'll be setting out how we're getting on in terms of delivery of outputs. And we'll also be bringing the annual monitoring statement for the National Park Management Plan, which will say how the National Park and ourselves and the mix of stakeholders that are involved in delivering the management plan are getting on with delivering the management plan aligned to the Protected Landscapes Targets and Outcomes Framework, which is how the National Park's performance is judged in the eyes of in the eyes of government. So we'll be doing all of that. I would want to just make sure that on the record that members understand one of the key pillars of our strategy, and there are 4 key pillars of our strategy, is about partnerships. And I have a couple of mantras in the organisation. One of those mantras is, it's not all about us. It's about how we work in partnership with others, including farmers, communities, and other local businesses. And we continue, primarily because thanks to funding we receive either from Farming and Protected Landscapes or Section 106 funding, to be able to continue to offer a community that enables and empowers others within the local area to deliver on our behalf.
Thanks, Tom.
I'm really reassured to hear Tom confirm that. Can we see that somewhere in the strategy? Is there somewhere where we can see what
it says it's the 4th pillar, it's the 3rd pillar of the strategy, partnership.
Okay. Does it have a value?
It doesn't. It's a pillar of the strategy. It basically is a kind of, in effect, a guide rail to our staff that basically says one of the things that we aspire to do in the process of growing the organisation by becoming a more project-based organisation is that we work through others.
Happy with that, Jim? Yeah. Okay.
It's written in there, black and white.
Over to you, Malcolm.
Yeah. Again, thanks very much for that, Pete. I'm not sure I agree with Jim that it's enjoyable listening, but it's certainly a challenge, put it that way. I've never known a year when we've had so much uncertainty at this stage. What's going to be happening in all the areas that you've talked about. And I do remember some years ago when we did have a significant cut. And unlike some of the other national parks who had to take not exactly knee-jerk reactions, but fairly rapid decisions that were not at all nice, we at least were in a position that we had some flexibility, we'd built in flexibility. And what you've just outlined reminds me that we still have that flexibility. We've got the reserves. We do the scenario planning and this sort of thing. So I found that quite helpful. The other thing I find helpful is just the fact that you mentioned the pension fund may be a positive. And I think, great, I'll bank that, thank you very much, you know. So they're the good things. I mean, the other thing is every time we look at the medium-term financial, for new members, every time we look at the medium-term financial strategy, there's always very large negative numbers all the way up. Don't worry too much about that. Just worry about the first one, and let's see how we get around that. But I think the other point as well, though, is that, I mean, I know we've not taken decisions about property, but property is something that we do know is coming down the line. So maybe it should have had something around there. But I don't say that in a critical way, because I think, you know, until we get some of this capital and revenue, again, the world's getting more complicated, isn't it? You know, as you say, capital and revenue, and you have clever ways of switching between one and the other. So I'm relatively relaxed that we're in a reasonable position as an authority to handle the things that are going to be thrown at us. We've done it in the past, and if it's really bad, we can do it in the future in a reasonable sort of way. I'm not saying that there wouldn't be hard decisions, because there clearly would. The thing that does concern me as well, though, is, and it's mentioned just very briefly in the report early on, is that if this core funding flatlining continues, there will be serious decisions that we do have to take about the things that we do at a strategic level. I know volunteers was mentioned, and it's been mentioned previously. I'm not sure the process of this, and I entirely agree with Tom. We don't want to set any hares running, but at the moment, as a member, I'm not clear which of the really good things that we're now doing could seriously be at threat if something pretty bad happens. And I guess I'm just saying, somehow or other, I'd like to know a bit more about that. If it is volunteers, let's talk about what we do about it. So I don't want to panic in any way about these numbers. I do take them very seriously. But I suppose my request is, should we be doing more to just think of the really difficult decisions that might come? I think we're in a reasonable place now, but maybe we should just start to think about that in a little bit more detail than we have done so far. As members, that is.
Yeah, just to come back on a couple of those points. I mean, all really, really good points. And certainly in terms of property, I'll have to think about that for the December paper. And what you say as well does really kind of emphasise why a lot of us are really saying to DEFRA, give us a 3-year agreement, because actually that gives you the ability to plan over 3 years and not every year have this, well, I don't know what's going to happen the following year or the following year. And whether you don't want to make a decision now, but in 2 years' time is unnecessary. So 3 years gives you the ability to strategically actually do that. Get the point around members absolutely need to be involved around what we would do, what services, etc. So we'll have a think about that and how we do that. We started those strategic sessions as a first touch point. Clearly we need to move those into really considering services. One thing I would quite like to say about volunteers, the reason that one's in the paper is just purely because it's 100% core funded at the moment in terms of that middle team. So all of that comes from DEFRA grant. You remember in the budget, we said we would look to try to start to externally fund that from projects. So make that first start of 20,000 in the current year budget. Struggling to do that at the moment, but we've got a few plans in place for next year. The reason for sort of focusing maybe on something like volunteering is because it is 100% funded out of DEFRA grant, but it goes into almost every project we do. But we don't get funding for the central team. So it's really actually not about doing less of volunteering necessarily, because volunteering is hugely, hugely valuable to outputs. It's actually about how do we fund that core team from those other areas. So actually, if you look at Section 106 projects, enormous amount of volunteers go into that. Virtually every externally funded project we do has volunteer time going into it. And therefore, the team here are actually doing a lot of work on those projects without getting any funding back. And also looking potentially at other things within volunteering strategies, such as like corporate volunteering, can that help to fund part of it as well? So there's all kinds of potential options to try to fund that team. So it's actually about looking at, with that team, actually, if DEFRA grant funding is going down, how can we do more of it? Because volunteering is really crucial to delivering outputs. So it's that more for volunteering. But that broader discussion point is, like Christine said, we get a 15% cut. There is absolutely a need for members to be strategically discussing the options.
Okay.
I wanted to build on this point that Malcolm mentioned, where we need to look at all the possibilities, all the options, and there might be some very difficult decisions. Always plan for the worst, hope for the best. I was reassured that Malcolm mentioned the word property, and you know how strongly I feel about it. And I think, Pete, in your answer to Malcolm, made it clear that before the members are going to make a decision, before a report is going to be presented to us, you are continuing to review all available options and possibilities in light of the information that's going to be presented by government soon, and make adjustment to the proposals within the property report to reflect the situation that we might be facing in the future. And I'm saying this because just imagine a situation where we are having very difficult financial position, and we've analyzed today some of the very gloomy scenarios, yet we are going to be spending a huge amount of money on a building that is going to not offer much more improvement than this, while we are comparing different situations compared to, for example, what we've got at the moment in the existing building. Maybe there are some minimal works that could be done in the existing building over the short term, so that we have better value for money for the taxpayer, rather than spending a huge amount of money that will end up costing this authority in interest and cash flow over the short and long term. And I'm just highlighting this without discussing any confidential information, and I'm not going to go into the figures that we have had recently. But the point I was going to make is that at the moment we are comparing two scenarios. One is having a new build, and the other scenario is having transformational change to this existing building. So we are comparing two things. But maybe there should be a third scenario, which is in addition to those two that I've just outlined. The third scenario should be minimal work to this building over short term, so that we can see this difficult period through. And then at the end of that short term period, there will be more clarity on whether there should be further investment or not, depending on the financial position of this authority. Because as we said earlier, there are some very difficult decisions that we have to make, and maybe this is one of the easier ones.
Yeah, look, I don't want to make this a discussion about property, Joe. You've explained the process. All I will say is that there isn't a low-cost option either. I'm very mindful of your optics, but I think it would be misleading to indicate to anybody that there's a low-cost option that we could pursue.
I was just referring to a lower cost option.
Thank you, and again, fantastic report. And I'm really starting to enjoy the. But actually, Malcolm, you made some very good points apart from that first point. And I think the fact that we need to delve more is very important. There were just two areas that I wanted to discuss. I think in your report, which I don't think you then brought up in what we're speaking now, is actually, rather than having a percentage contingency plan, is to have that 1 million contingency plan you were talking about in the report. Do you want to explain that a bit more to us? Because it seemed that was in the report, but I wasn't sure.
I think that's probably in reference to the risk reserves position that we have. So I briefly mentioned that in response to Malcolm just now, but yes, you're right, it wasn't in the slides. I kind of referred to it, but not directly, but it gives us the ability to not make knee-jerk decisions and be strategic about what we do. Part of the problem we have, as I've said before, is the late notification we get from DEFRA on things like the grant that doesn't give an ability to plan for it, which is why I want that 3 years. What that reserve does do is it enables us to manage short-term shocks.
Perhaps we should put it up. We should have an agreement to put it up to that.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think we're at 890,000 or so at the moment. I think don't quote me on that number exactly, but it's high 800s. We have an MTFS to try and get that up to 1 million, but that is the reserve that gives us the ability to, say next year, take a bit of a deficit so that we can plan for it properly, as opposed to having to do something knee-jerk.
I think that's what I was sort of trying to say is I think that's something that perhaps we should say, is that enough? Is that the right thing? And that we should perhaps, that's a member's discussion point that perhaps we should have clocked in a bit more on in potentially for this. And then the only other thing I was going to ask was, I know we missed on a very big project, which I think we've gone back into more discussions on it, have we, for one of our things, which would have made a huge impact on this year on our budgets and things. And so I was just wondering, have we got any other projects like that in the line that would help with this strategic planning on that?
Yeah, no, as Heather's indicating to me, that will come up later in Ellen's report on external funding. But yes, we're engaged in those kind of conversations about something a bit bigger.
Okay.
But we do have a
5-year plan.
Yeah, I mean we have a portfolio of project ideas and proposals that we can in effect make available to when we do see external funding opportunities, be that with the York and North Yorkshire Combined Authority, be that with National Lottery funders, be that with central government, or be that with charitable trusts and foundations, we can pull them off and work them. That's something that we consciously build and develop so that we can achieve our strategy of growth by becoming a more project-based organisation.
So perhaps we should be looking at more than 2.5, which is in your budget, is what I'm saying. I'm trying to.
Yeah, potentially.
Sorry, Heather, have I said something wrong?
No.
No, sorry. You said something, and I thought I said something wrong. Sorry.
No, I was just agreeing.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually I noted in there about whether or not the 2.5 million is high enough. So at the moment, that's the one that members have agreed as part of the business plans 26-27. I think there is something to be said for whether or not that stretches us enough. I think if you look at our reports from last year, 2 years, we've done about 3.5 million to 4 million. But that does include farming protected landscapes. So if that didn't sort of continue into the future, that's an extra sort of £1 million to find. But there is a question about whether that 2.5 million stretches enough, and actually over 5 years what that ought to be.
Thank you.
Any other members? Well, I think we should finish on a positive note. I mean, as North Yorkshire Council knows, it's a week last week of how bad things are, and we've got to look at the worst case scenario. But I do feel confident that, having listened to this morning to Gavin, that we've got good, robust finance in place, Pete, and I think the team. I think we've got to look at all this, and that going forward, obviously we looked at income, and I don't want to dwell on it, but we have lots of initiative, and I think moving forward, we keep doing what we're doing, it will help. It's not going to solve everything. We can only face the problems as it's coming. When do you think we'll find out the settlement date then? When do you think expected?
We really don't know at the moment. I think pre-Christmas is optimistic, I would suggest. January hopeful, I think is probably where I would say at the moment.
Yeah.
But the budget in November, I'm sure they'll be waiting for that to make sure decisions are the right ones. So.
All right, well, we're in the same position as other national parks, but obviously, okay, well, thank you very much for that. As I say, I think on a positive note, we're probably in a better position than some other authorities. I think we work extremely hard to try and get things right. Okay, so should that recommendation, we accept the paper? Okay, thank you. We don't need to vote on it, do we? No. Okay, thank you. Right, sitting very patiently, Kate, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm here to present the quarterly performance scorecard for Q2 of this year. So all the indicators which are in Appendix 1 are underway and on track, apart from those identified in the paper and also in the appendix, so we have 2 indicators relating to our organisational profile that were a bit behind targets. So our social media engagements, that's things like where people engage with a social media post, such as a like or a comment. they're nearly back up to a previous high of nearly 1.4 million. They're just slightly shy of that target. So after a dip, they are coming back, but we're still a little bit behind where we want to be. And our video views, they have increased exponentially in previous quarters, but we are seeing a levelling off. And the comms team believes this is due to posting fewer videos through late August and into September at the peak of the wildfire, which is appropriate because our messaging was more focused around keeping visitors away from the wildfire area. The staff turnover figure is still quite high, but the quarterly figure, which was the 4-quarter turnover figure, but the quarterly figure on its own was only 0.6%, which is very, very low. So it looks like at the moment we're returning to towards our target of 7%, though we're above that at the moment. Volunteers, so our volunteer numbers do include young volunteers, which are Explorers, Young Ranger, Youth Plus and Youth Voice, and adult volunteers, which include volunteer rangers. And as we've seen in recent quarters, all 3 indicators are slightly below where they should be, below their targets. So we're seeing consistency there, but not much growth, unfortunately. And the recommendation is that members note the scorecard, but I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate. Any comments? Thanks, Jim.
Having banged on about output, here is some, isn't it? And I think we're, by and large, going the right way. So, well done for keeping measuring it. But it is really important that we can demonstrate that we are going the right way. That's fundamental to what we do. And so thanks for that. And I've just, we need to start thinking about the emotional value to these outputs as well. Back to the social return on investment thing. It helps us guides us to do the things which give us the biggest impact for our money. And anyway, you do that with your weekly shopping, wouldn't you? So we are doing this in actions, but trying to sort of think about the value of those to the people that receive them. It's my theme for today, Chair, but I think it's something for the future. I do.
Yeah, sorry, Martin.
Yeah, just a brief one. It just occurred to me, I should have probably mentioned it to you before the meeting, so I can leave you to answer it. But all of this is good, and we've talked about volunteers and that, and it's good to see there's a lot of positives in all of this. The thing that just occurred to me was, and I can't remember which meeting it was, but we heard that the income from the gallery was down on some sort of targets or other. We know there've been staff changes and all that sort of thing. At some point, can you just let me know what you think are the reasons behind that? I don't need an answer now if there's not sufficient staff around the table. Is it just that people are buying pictures, that sort of thing? Is there anything else? How are things going other than?
I mean, that's part of the Q2 report that'll be coming up later in the agenda, but I can get an answer for you. I don't have an exact reasoning for the gallery, but I'll come back to you with an answer to the whys. But yes, it is a little bit down this year. It can be based on what they're displaying in the year as well. So, but yeah, we'll come back to that separately.
Okay, thanks.
Any other members? And that's working again now. We talked about value for money early on and initiatives. Well, obviously we've got that right at Danby Lodge. We see the figures increasing. I mean, that is an example of the governance and what we've done. So I think that's got to be noted. And it's And I think I did have a little bit of feedback about the things that were selling in the shop. I think they had a bit of a clear out. I think I saw some cowboy hats somewhere in a box. I think there was a bit of a, I think they had a bit of a, I seem to recall that there was a bit of stuff being there for a long time, but again, it's for another, did offer to buy one when I saw it. But thank you. Anyway, any other comments on that?
Yeah, just a minor one. I would agree that the increase in numbers that we're seeing at Sutton Bank and Danby Lodge is reassuring and suggests that we're doing some of the right things in terms of investing in our frontline assets and delivery. I've made the point before to members in this room. The scorecard is about key performance indicators in the authority, about the stuff that we do habitually to help us understand how we're doing as an organisation. So there were a couple of indicators at the last quarterly review around staff turnover and absence that were starting to trend in the wrong direction. We were a little bit concerned about those as officers. We're now starting to see some kind of downward movement, so that's encouraging as well. So I'm glad we're now in a position where we've got a stable kind of stable set of metrics that they don't tell us everything, but they give us a sense of how we're doing in terms of our delivery as an organisation that we can measure frequently and robustly. Interestingly, we had a joint management team meeting with our colleagues in the Yorkshire Dales a few weeks ago, where Kate did a really good session, just kind of comparing and contrasting how the two organisations monitor and measure performance, which was helpful for us to kind of learn from each other about how we can all do a better job in this area.
I think we do, Tom.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Thank you. Thanks, Kate. So members know the scorecard. Unless any other questions. Thank you. I think we're back to you, Pete, shall we?
Yeah, so on to the Q2 finance update for the current year. Forecast reporting at the moment has a deficit of 43,000 on the current year forecast. So I guess that's probably the headline to take from the report. The main drivers of that are one of the planning income. Planning income is down. We forecast that at the moment. We've not had very many large applications, so actually the trend of small applications is similar to last year, but we had 3 large applications last year that really helped with the figures. This year we haven't had that. It would only take 1 large application actually to change this forecast, but at the moment we think we need to put something in at Q2, so we're planning for it. Insurance costs, so they're higher this year than we had in the budget. That's mainly due to car insurance. We've had a couple of accidents, that's gone up, and then just inflationary within the insurance sector anyway. Staffing costs, so we have seen an increase in running costs at Sutton Bank and car parks to cover sickness at the moment, particularly over the busy summer periods. So there is a bit of extra cost in the forecast for that. And then there's a couple of savings shortfalls as well. You'll see the savings table, one against procurement. So that was about looking for procurement opportunities to reduce cost in bulk purchases, and external funding for volunteers, which actually we just covered. We had a number in there to try to start getting some external project funding for that core team. And that's a little bit behind the curve at the moment. And that's partially offset by utility savings. The new contract that we've drawn up generates some savings for us. Just a couple of notes on income streams, always some of the more sensitive areas. Car park income's doing very well at the moment. It's on target to be higher than budget, but there's some caution around that, and it's driven largely out of the Newton-under-Rosebery and Sutton Bank, and also Thornton-le-Dale. So Thornton-le-Dale's actually been lower than budget for the last 3 or 4 years. Actually, is a bit above at the moment. So exceptional performance coming out of Newton-under-Rosebery and Sutton Bank in particular is really helping to drive that performance. But we are taking a little bit of caution in the forecast at the moment and not forecasting anything above budget. Strong income from Levisham is forecast at Q1, so that's still in there, and the cafes as well. So the Truffled Hog at Sutton Bank and Danby is performing very well. The arrangement we have is rent plus concession share. So the concession share is performing very well in line with their performance. So that's good news. Investment interest, so that's capped in the budget, so it doesn't affect the bottom line forecast, but we are expecting that to generate between 150 to 250k of extra funding this year, which will go into reserves. So that's currently what we're expecting from that area, and that would be a recommendation in the end of year report from members in terms of which reserve that would go to. And then notes on gallery and events income is down at the moment, that can trend sometimes with what we've got on in the gallery in a particular year. But yeah, I'll come back to you, Malcolm, in terms of any details on that specifically. One of the big changes in this report, we've got Appendix 4, which is the £1.5 million of capital from DEFRA, broken down by projects. You remember at Q1 we had no spend on that because it came literally just after we'd actually had it agreed in June. But this one actually brings the detail of the projects in there, and we're still on target despite some challenges to spend the whole of that £1.5 million. The main challenge being actually the short notice to try to allocate that much funding. But you'll see some really good projects in there, things like solar panels in car parks and things like that will help to generate some savings for us across our infrastructure. And all on target at the moment to be able to deliver, so that's good news, including the depot, which is on target and going well so far. Section 106 and projects is an update in there. We've got a couple of areas of Section 106 in Woodsmith that are a little bit behind this year in the forecast, Core Policy D and Landscape and Ecology. Landscape and Ecology, I think a chunk of that is access works, because there are so many demands on access work teams at the moment this year, particularly with things like the capital funding, the £1.5 million, access for all DEFRA funding, that Section 106 is the one that has a bit of flexibility to allow them to deliver over the current year. So that's more about the pressure on the resource for the teams to deliver that alongside all of the other funding opportunities. And then linking Levisham, I noted in Q1 it had an extension to the end of June. That's now profiled in. And there's a risk on the Restoring Rosebery project. There's negotiations ongoing at the moment between us and the National Trust as a partner. So it's just a nod to a little bit of a risk around that project delivering in this year. So projects are on target to deliver, just maybe not in this year. And then just a note on some of the projects like Grubs Up is spectacularly successful, but actually has limited resources to deliver it. There's just a little element of risk there, nothing noted, but just the sheer capacity for a project that is really taking off successfully right across the park. New finance system. So you'll note that it's all going well at the moment in terms of the function of the system, but the reporting is a little bit behind. We've got training sessions, 4 training sessions coming up over the next 2 weeks. In fact, the first one this afternoon, to help develop the reporting. It was noted last time I get prior year in. There's prior year against car parks, but I'm hoping to introduce prior year against all the tables in here. At the moment, I've got it in against car parks, but it's all in the system, but I'm just finding my way trying to get it in there at the moment. So we have got some additional training over 4 sessions coming up for all finance staff to really develop that reporting suite. So that's an ongoing one, and I just recognise and nod to the fact that it's behind probably where we'd hoped it would be from a reporting side. But it will continue to develop that over the next 2 quarters.
Thanks for that, Pete. Very difficult having a new finance system, very challenging, and at times it can be a bit fractious, but you'll get there in the end, and it makes things easier and it's seamless through your procurement to whatever. Thanks for that. Any members like to ask Pete some questions? I've got a couple, but anybody else? Okay. Yeah, Pete. You briefly talked about insurance. You talked about the motor insurance, which obviously, due to an accident, is going to. I think they're all going up across the board. But when we look at the employment and public liability, and again, I think we talked briefly before, without going too much discussion about the problems we got with it on the Levisham to do with the landscape, and we've also got monitoring on there, but that's an ongoing thing. We're going to try and look at that, aren't we, and see whether we're going to continue to have to do that, which could be some savings on that, presumably, could there?
So we'll continue to look at, in terms of specifically about the landscape, we'll continue to look at whether that's required with insurance. So that's a scheme that was put in on the landslip over the railway to make sure that we monitor it effectively, so that from an insurance perspective, they will effectively cover us in the event of a landslip, because we're monitoring it appropriately if the worst should happen, such as it actually go over or hit a train. So that monitors constantly all the time. And that was a long discussion that my predecessor Ian Nichols had with insurance about what actually do you need to put in place to make sure that we are covered on all those risks. And that's an ongoing thing around how long do we have to continue that for. That will largely depend on whether that land moves or what the risk is in the land. And we'll continue to monitor that. That's a separate issue in a way from the insurance, which is just going up. The sector is going up in terms of costs. but we have had a number of claims around motor vehicles up to last year, which meant that our motor vehicle insurance in particular has gone up, and then we've also had another one this year, so it's not going to go down anytime soon, unfortunately.
No, sorry, I accept that, but I was also alluding to the fact the employing public liability, and that's sort of like a flat rate on turn or whatever. And I think our accident record is pretty good. I would suggest, so I'll be looking at that point of view. But what I did think about in the previous slide, were there any direction where you could have a preferred broker that dealt with, say, not for today, but looking at across the whole of the UK, if there was a broker that sort of joined together, and we might get better rates with doing it collectively, separately, but in the sense if you get a broker that's familiar with what we do. But I'll leave that with you, Tom. All right, thank you. We all recommend that. All agree. Thank you. This keeps going on. So back again. Right. Thank you very much for being patient. So it's a double act, is it now? Is it okay? Thank you.
Hi. Thanks.
Eileen and Mark. Thank you.
So yeah, I'm conscious a lot has been covered in the finance reports, so I'm happy to fill any gaps. But the usual report is around the external funding position, and then on to Mark for the project management development side of things. So the first graph, as usual, represents the total funding that we've had awarded in each financial year that we've secured. So this year, we're looking at nearly 1 million, and that's through larger pots such as the Wilson Foundation, Carbon Negative and Net Zero. And as it said in the report, we're sort of leaning towards that longer-term strategic position, so looking at sort of horizon setting really around future funding bids that we can work on at a longer term rather than sort of your shorter-term pots of funding. So we'll come on to those again later on in the report. And as you know, you're very well informed about the wildfire, so lots of staff time has been directed to that, which obviously still meets our management and business plan objectives. And we've had some good success around that. So with the York and North Yorkshire Combined Authorities Net Zero, that's actually now secured, and we've received the draft funding agreement for that. We've got several applications underway, and we've had that Bellwyn scheme submission, so that's been submitted by the fire service, and then further bids have been developed. We're looking at the Nature for Climate Discovery Fund around peatland restoration. We've now, since the report went in, which we'll report on at the next RASC, is the Species Recovery Fund. So that's for really protected species like adder, large heath and juniper and petty-whin, and black grouse and nightjar, and that's in the wildfire area as well as Levisham Estate. A bit of a joint project there. And all of this is being coordinated through the Local Resilience Economic Cell, so we are representatives on that. So myself and Katrina from Comms and Emily, we go to that every other week and talk about where the funding can come from, and so we don't duplicate each other's efforts. And then we have a separate internal funding strategy for the wildfire, so we're making sure that all of the teams throughout the authority are working on it together and having conversations with funders collectively. Then moving on to table 2.3 is just go through the funding applications that we've submitted and are awaiting a decision on. The third one down is the Natural England Protected Landscape funding, so we've had that secured now since this report went in. And we're just waiting on a few responses or grant agreements for these that have been submitted. The coast to coast one, which is a bit further down the table, so that's the nature corridor that's going through all of the protected landscapes and the gaps in between. That is due for submission at the end of November. So we've just been working with an external contractor who's been working with the partners on that. And below that is the Generation Green 3, but that's the old name. It's now called Tomorrow's Stewards. They have a meeting with the National Lottery Heritage Fund tomorrow to talk about whether, with a few questions that they may have, just to see whether they can pursue that as a full application or whether it will be rejected. So we'll see what happens, the outcome of that tomorrow. And then moving on to table 2.4 are the proposals that have recently been funded. So as I've mentioned, we've had that funding from the Net Zero through for the wildfire. And then we've been successful with all of our 3 submissions to the Combined Authorities Carbon Negative Fund, so both the Revenue Fund and the Capital Fund that we submitted our applications to. So work is underway at the moment, just they haven't started yet, but we're still working on the grant agreement with the Combined Authority for that. And then I think you mentioned earlier about the larger proposal to the Heritage Fund that we were unsuccessful with. So just an update on that is we have had another look at the vision and the theory of change, having more of a focus on the grubs up sort of successes and focusing on a larger scale project with that. So across the whole of the B lines, which covers the south and up through the coast. It's actually still a nature corridor project, so it doesn't deter too much from what we originally submitted. It's just a bit more of a focused project for that. And we're still looking at the larger up to £10 million proposal to do that. Then you have the partnership with the Trust. I thought I'd put that in because we were a big player in that, but obviously led by the Trust, and it was all down to their good work at the Trust to secure that contract with the Combined Authority for the Green Social Prescribing Programme, which hopefully you've seen lots of press about, because it's been a very high profile project for the Combined Authority and also for the Trust and all the partners involved. And that was a very sort of short-term piece of work up to the end of March, but we're hoping that it will lead to future commissioning with either Health or the Combined Authority in the future. And that's looking at a structured 10-week intervention with people to prevent sort of mental health issues developing, and also working with healthcare and community professionals, training them to be advocates for green social prescribing, so then they think of it as an intervention as part of their piece of work with their patients. And that's the final bit of the external funding. Just to move on to Mark's project development.
Thanks, Alan. And any questions?
Yeah, one stop there. Questions? Tom? Oh, Malcolm.
Yeah, can I just ask you a general question about the fire? Because I mean, it was great when we went out there and saw all this stuff and talked to staff. I found that really useful. The big message that came out is we need a lot of public money from wherever to help all of the various people involved to tackle the impact of all of that. And somehow shouldn't we as an authority be keeping that a bit separate to the other sorts of things? Because I've got 2 sort of reactions. One is it ought to create a spike in our income because, you know, the money that we've already got and the other money that's going to come in suggests that the amount of external funding ought to significantly go up. I mean, we're talking about millions, weren't we, over a period of time. The downside of that is the point that we've only got sufficient staff resources, and if we're spending a lot of resources in getting all this fire money in, you'd expect there to be some sort of negative impact on that in the other things. And so I'm not saying that, you know, we need to look at that in lots of detail, but for all sorts of reasons, not least because it's useful over the next few years that we're continuing to ask for money for because of the fire, to say, well, yeah, this is how much we've got in so far, but we still need this amount, and it's going to be an ongoing thing. I'm not sure. I know it's not easy what I'm asking, but I think it would be maybe you can just give it a thought to how we may do that, because I think as members we'll be asking just the basic question about how much money have we got in for the fire from various places, and how much more do we need, and how is it all going? You know, as we monitor that as an event.
It's right to highlight that some of that money will be separate and additional, and so for reinstatement of the fire breaks that were put in, that absolutely will sit separate, I think, to what we've got. There are some of the things that we are looking to bring into that area that do align with our management plan and business plan targets. They're not entirely separate for the effort that we make. They can, in some of the same ways that our usual funding drive can support aspects of our core services and things. So it's I think important not to separate them entirely from the forward motion, you know, on what we're trying to do. But it's right to recognise that in some respects it will be on top of.
I think as well the applications such as the species recovery one that we've recently submitted for 1.1 million, a lot of that is helped because it's a wider project. It's not just about the wildfire, which I think a lot of the funding applications will be. I think it's helpful to mention about the wildfire because it sort of heightens funders' sort of interest, and you know it's quite a high profile issue that's happened recently. So I think that helps, but it won't always be just about the wildfire. It'll be wider. It'll be about community engagement, people's understanding of behaviours in the landscape, and sort of things that affect the wider national park rather than just the wildfire area. Yeah.
No, I mean I appreciate that there's all those complicated little distinctions, and it makes it more difficult. You know, people out there will be saying, "What's the cost of this?" and that sort of thing. So somehow or other we need some sort of numbers.
Yeah, we'll definitely track that, and in future reports we can keep it as a separate table. Maybe I did think about that for this, but it was so integral that but it would be good for future ones.
Just a technical thing for me to understand. Presumably, when we've got the Generation Green and you put grant value 11.1 million, that wouldn't be all to us. So that would be what, a 1 million for us, would it be, or something? So it's just difficult when it's.
Yeah, because that's yet to be decided, because it's just an expression of interest. So when you put in an expression of interest to the lottery, it's just a top figure. But if we're invited through to the next stage, then the budget will be decided. It's because it's a lot of partners, so it's not just national parks, it's YHA and other community groups as well. It's probably looking at around 50,000. It's not even, you know, a huge amount. So, but that's yet to be decided, and it's going to be influenced as well by the conversation tomorrow with Heritage. That maybe that they like a certain section of the project and not all of it, or they might want to focus somewhere else. You know, you just don't know what's going to be the conversation tomorrow. But I'll update the report for next time to reflect that.
It might help sometimes, perhaps, when we're looking at these reports to see what is national and what you think we might be getting, because obviously we're looking at a 2.5 million budget or whatever, and as you suddenly see 11 million, you go, well, what's to worry about? No, I'm just joking, but do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
it might be useful just to see what the thought is that approximately would go towards what our officers are doing and the input that they would be putting in, because it helps to sort of see the budgets a bit more clearly.
I can do that. Yeah,
thank you.
No problem.
Thanks. Yeah, just building on what Malcolm was saying, I was just thinking when I read it about around the fire and things about the potential for opportunity cost, and so it'd just be interesting as well as the figures to have a bit of narrative at some point about how redirecting some of our efforts around the fire stuff has perhaps impacted on other things, you know. But on the positive side, I just wanted to come back because I don't think we say often enough, we sort of imply it, but this external funding thing is of such fundamental importance to the park and everything that we're able to achieve. And obviously you come and give the report, and I'm sure there's lots of people that support you behind the scenes. But just to say thank you again for all the efforts that you've put in and the incredible success that you've continued to have.
Well, Christine said it. Yeah, well done. It's really important that we achieve it. It's really important that we seem to be trying. One of my graziers was astonished to find a posse of black grouse in his moor edge field just about a month ago. So it must be working. It's the first time I've heard of them in the North York Moors in my lifetime. So.
To you. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So Pete pulled the graph at 2.7 up earlier, but just sort of going into that in a little bit more detail. The projects that we've got continue to move through those stages from development through development and delivery into completion. So we're seeing the right movement of those projects through against business plan. The pipeline, as you'll see, for next year remains above target. And there are further sort of strong opportunities out there that we're pursuing that should allow us to increase the sort of strength of that pipeline. A lot of that pipeline now we're working on projects that go beyond this management plan period. So we'll see there is another couple of bars appearing to the right of that on the information that we're tracking. We're continuing to track alignment with management plan, so that's just it's still a numerical count of the projects in figure 3 in 2.9 that demonstrates that we are hitting all the areas of the management plan, and we do that each time. Each time we look at a project, we're making sure that it is aligned, so it's not just bringing the money through the door; it is doing the things that we want to do with that money. The contribution to core, it remains a challenge to get funders to recognise that what we do needs all of the associated support functions to be funded. Some government funding is allowing us to put that money into the projects, so we're seeing an increase in the amount that we can offset against projects. But certainly for a lot of the other private or other funders, lottery funders, we're not in every case getting that match. So we do need, as I think Pete mentioned earlier again, we do need to keep up that sort of momentum to try and see if we can get as much of the project funding, not just onto capital items, but onto or additional staff, but onto funding the staff at the core of the organisation. In terms of the overall project health check, so we've got generally all of our projects are on time, cost, and against the quality, against the outputs that we're asking them to do. There are 3, and again, I think Pete has name checked most of the ones I wanted to talk a little about. So restoring Rosebery, there have been some issues in the partner resources and some delays there, but the conversations are positive there. The relationships remain strong, and that's getting back on track. Linking Levisham, significant project. Regrettably, we lost the weather window for some of the LiDAR survey work, but all of the other reports and documents and bits and pieces that are supporting that project are on track and progressing well. And so we are moving now towards getting the cost model together and looking at how that then is taken into agreement. So it's the second year, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's the second round of pilots in the landscape recovery scheme. Not many of the first round ones have yet reached fruition, so there's still lots. It is a pilot. It is a new way of looking at funding those aspects of ELMS. But I feel like we're in a good place to keep that one moving. And I think Pete also mentioned Grubs Up, which I just wanted to flag as a particular success, just in terms of the amount of engagement that's generating and the number of different areas of what we do that it's now starting to touch. And we're using that really now to drive a number of other potential funds. It's great to go into other funders showing this has been successful and we want to build on it. So we're going to go into more areas and we're going to link it to more aspects of projects, so dark skies and a lot of the the way in which it follows the routes through the landscape. So it's been really nice to see how that relatively small project is driving what we're doing elsewhere. I don't think there was anything. No, sorry. Yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Members? Well, I've got a question, if that's okay. Right, okay. Rosebery topping, obviously, restoring Rosebery. It obviously got some challenges. It's National Trust we're working with. You appreciate the fact that you know there's insufficient to clear how we're going to actually fill the gaps. Is it sort of from National Trust point of view? Is there anything we can do? It is well used. I mean, there's lots of footpaths, and I'm not sure what the problem is. Okay, so your job. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, the reasons for the delay at Rosebery topping, the second phase of works, is twofold. First one is that the technical design needed for the remaining 3 paths, which are the really complicated ones around the actual ascent upwards, which are on the south side. The company doing that couldn't do the design works for a period of 3 months, which then knocked on the impact on the biodiversity survey and the archaeology survey. So that's all happened now. It just has been delayed by 3 months compared to where it was. But the second thing, and the thing that was probably more anxious to us, was that during the late spring and summer period, in effect, the National Trust went in very inward focused because it was going through a significant restructure where a lot of staff that were involved in the Restoring Rosebery project were effectively put at risk. And there was a lot of internal discussions around how the National Trust organised themselves internally. We contributed to 1 or 2 of those, but I think as members would appreciate, when any organisation goes through a big restructure, it stops effectively communicating and moving things on. So we did suffer from that. I'm pleased to say I think it's now back on track. We've had 2 or 3 meetings where the necessary pieces of work that needed to happen have taken place, and I'm confident that by the time we come round to the next RAG rating, we should be able to upgrade it to green. Work is happening now. One of the paths through Cliffwood, there's work happening on that, and some of the other pieces of path work that don't require planning permission will be undertaken in the winter, and then the main work, subject to planning approval on the remaining slope paths, will take place during the summer next year.
That's great, Joanne. I mean, we just need to know that, and I gathered. I mean, as you're well aware, I mean, we've got our car park there. We'd hate to think that people weren't going to use it because they couldn't get the full access. I mean, twofold and safety. But I'm pleased that we're doing everything possible, to work with them. I could see from there that it certainly wasn't something that we'd stopped doing. It was more into well done for getting on track. Anyway, thanks very much for that. Thank you. Any other questions for Ellen and Mark? Well, just to know, I mean, we've had a thank you, Ellen, but I would want to say, really, yours is always a bit of a good news story. And well, Mark, thank you very much for all the effort. I mean, it really is good to see that we don't stand still, and it's people like you and your team. And thank you. You are really to do such a great job and pass that message down the line. Thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah. Just recommendation that we accept this wonderful report. Okay, thank you. Right, I think it's Tom now. Thank you, Tom.
Good morning, all. So I'm just here to update you on the latest carbon accounts for financial year 24-25, which is the most recent reporting year because we're a year out of step on these things. And our overall progress on our business plan target to reduce our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions by 75% by 2027. Just as a brief update, Scope 1 emissions refer to emissions from fossil fuel burning for heating buildings and for combustion engine vehicles, and Scope 2 emissions relate to emissions from electricity usage. So The headline figure is a 7.4 decrease in our emissions since the last reporting year, so the downward trend continues, and that constitutes, if we look more generally at the business plan target, 55% reduction in Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions since 21-22, and about a 74% reduction since we started collecting emissions data in 18-19. That reduction in emissions largely comes from the introduction of the 2 EV vehicles, which we saw at the start of this year. Obviously, we've only had 1 year's data, so we've got to take it with a little bit of pinch of salt. We need more years to have a more significant trend to be visible. But it would seem that it's the authority fleet reduction is the principal driver of that. Elsewhere, emissions have stayed pretty much flat. There's been a slight increase in building emissions through electricity usage, which is what we anticipate, given that we've moving from fossil fuel heating sources to electrified heating sources such as heat pumps. Looking at some of the specific actions in terms of our decarbonisation efforts, in February 25, our solar PV installation at Sutton Bank came online, which is a 24 kilowatt system. It's currently, as we've seen this last summer, it's providing over half, if not around 70, up to 80% of its the building's energy usage during summer. We're still awaiting from the DNO from Northern Power Grid the export tariff, the NYMNPA, which is the piece of information you need to provide electricity export. It's quite a slow process, and as you can imagine, the DNOs, which are never particularly forthcoming with this thing, are under quite high pressure. So we were warned by the installer that the NYMNPA would be slow in coming. I have it on my desk to chase this again because we were promised it last month. In terms of that solar work, so we had allocation of over £130,000 of DEFRA capital funding for further solar and renewables expansion. So as part of that, we've awarded a tender for an additional 19 kilowatt capacity solar extension to Sutton Bank, so supplementing that existing installation with more panels on that roof. We're also going to be looking at potentially 2 batteries to be installed up there, which will further increase or reduce energy usage. We're looking at between a 35 and 50 kilowatt peak installation up at Danby Lodge to be installed on the roofs adjacent to the main elevation, so it won't be on that main Pantal roof. So that's a significant system, and that would also be supplemented with batteries to be installed on the rear of the building. Work to procure that is going to be is forthcoming. We have one slight complication with the design in terms of we have a meter for the cafe there, which slightly complicates the architecture of the system, but we're working with the cafe operator to see if there's a way forward on that. There'll be a way forward anyway, just the more efficient system it needs a bit of negotiation. And the final solar installations will be small panel installations and solar immersion heating systems at 6 of the toilet facilities across the national park, which should go a long way to cost neutralise those toilet facilities. Thermal efficiency, because this isn't simply about generation, it's about reducing our energy usage. So thermal efficiency at Sutton Bank has been improved by the installation of new automatic doors. If anybody can remember those previous doors, they were just a massive waste of hot air, particularly in COVID when they had to be open. So that had been installed, and we're getting good reports from Chris and the team that that's making a significant impact on that. And I think that's largely it. I've put a note in there that we're working with colleagues across the other national parks as part of the climate leads to look at how we increase our reporting to include more Scope 3 emissions, which are the emissions that come from the things we procure, the goods and services we use, We do a little bit of this via reporting to DEFRA currently, but as a National Park family, we're looking at how we can improve that collectively. So that's it. And recommendation is that you acknowledge the work that's going going on in terms of our decarbonisation efforts, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, members?
It's sort of ironic, isn't it? We were talking earlier about what terrible things might happen to our budget. If we got a massive cut in our budget, it probably would help our climate challenge, because the more people you've got, the more emissions you've got. But not dwelling on that. I just wanted to ask about the panels at Sutton Bank. Now we've actually got them and had them for what was an exceptionally sunny year. I just, at some stage, be interesting to know how they performed, and I'm pleased that you're doing the battery thing, because clearly, that is a way that you can, if you're producing more electricity that you need in the daytime when you don't want the lights on, the battery means you can use it at night. Because trying to sell it back to the grid is a complete waste of time, isn't it? So, yeah, pleased to hear that. We're talking about this in business planning for premises and stuff too, so it'd be good to get a performance check now we've done it, see if it really works like we thought it would.
Just to respond on that, as we're moving into this electrified world, the data we need to collect is getting slightly more complex. Previously, we simply used electricity billing to generate the usage data. We need to be moving into a far more dynamic situation where we can using smart meters more, although smart meter rollout has been like pulling teeth given our supplier, and just kind of nationally the unification of that system has been complicated. We have got more smart meters than we ever have, but there are still some holes. So we need to drive that. But now that we're combining generations, so we've got another input. We're also combining EV usage, so that hits the bottom line. That kind of slightly skews our data. So we need to start working out how we can better unify that reporting. And I think in December's SLT, we're going to be discussing how we can prioritise that, how we can produce a strategy to make that more fine-grained, that data, because it's slightly clunky currently. In the Sutton Bank installation, we have the system we use. We have an app which we can see the real-time generation. So that gives us confidence that what we're seeing, that they're working effectively. And then the strategy is with all our installations, we're using the same system, subject to procurement, so we can try and get an entire estate view of that solar uptake. It's a little bit difficult because of the lag time to see the dates, to see the energy usage, that you've got to kind of have a little bit of pinch of salt and wait for the trend to emerge. But yeah, it's currently working well.
Good. I just mean, once we have the data, we need to understand it, don't we? And with the batteries, I don't know. There might be a possibility in times when your panels or your turbines aren't working, that you could use a cheap rate electricity during the night or something like that to charge your batteries. So having a battery gives you a number of options to reduce your power costs.
Our strategy is to use as much as we can on site. We don't want to be, like, say, exporting anything, because the revenues off that are so low. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know you were that well up on that, Jim. Well done for that. But seriously, it was a very good report, and I think you must have read my mind, Tom, because I put on down benchmarking, and that was a question. So delighted. I mean, we learn from each other, and we're all in the same boat as to make, So that's great you're doing that, and I get a bit confused about science stuff, but I've got there with it now on how you put these. I mean, we get lots of problems about batteries and fire and all. I'm quite sure you've gone down the route about how you look after them and make it safe. But no, thank you very much, and members, I'm sure just say that we accept your report, and thank you much indeed. Thank you. I think it's back to Peter this day. Yeah, Peter. Right.
Yes, give everybody a break from my voice, but back now for the next three.
I mean, did anyone? I mean, we're nearly going to the. I mean, I didn't. Did you want me to stop? I normally have a bit of a break. Did you want? We're getting towards the end. Does anybody think? Shall we do crack on with it? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Right. Okay.
These should be quicker than certainly the NTFS. So the first one's corporate risk register. So obviously we bring this each quarter. There's no changes to the risk levels in the reports of any of the categorised items or areas. There's some degree of actions risk, in part in some areas because of the wildfire focus has sort of taken, in particular things like maybe project areas and things, and project developments. But happy to take the report as read, happy to take any questions, but there's nothing major in there that's different from what members approved at the end of the year.
Is that okay, members? Any questions? I'll take it as read. Thank you, Peter. Thank you. And again, health and safety.
Yeah, so the next one's health and safety report. So just a nod, actually, Tom mentioned it earlier, but just around sickness absence and things like that we always quoted here. That it's on target at the moment, but as you remember last year, actually over the winter months, we got quite a lot of sort of winter colds and things like that. So at the moment, whilst it's on target, there is certainly a risk over the winter, if we see a similar winter again, that will be just above that 2 days target. So it's just a little bit of an amber around that one at the moment, but it's improving. The other element of the paper, just to draw attention to, is the 3 areas that I've put down that I think are worth noting in terms of sort of the accident incident reporting that we've had. The first one's around cycling at Sutton Bank. So we had quite a number of accidents reported from Sutton Bank. In part, it shows the proactivity that actually we report any kind of accident or incident that comes to the attention of visitor centre staff, including where people have just had a graze or something like that as they've fallen off bikes. But given the actual volume of instances that occurred, we did do a piece of work to have a look just to see if there's any trends or anything that we ought to be looking at more closely. I'm pleased to say from that, it links really just to the volume of cyclists, particularly over that peak summer period. At the site, we are inviting cyclists both to things like the pump track and some of those as a really sort of premium cycling venue. It's inevitable to some extent that we will get accidents on site. One area in particular that needs close focus is the pump track. I think quite a few incidents came from the pump track. I think the nature of it is that kind of cycling. There will be occasional people falling off there, but we do need to have really close focus to make sure that the track remains in really good condition, that it's regularly reviewed, and that we don't have any incidents up there because of the condition of the track. So that's certainly an area of focus to make sure that we don't start to get accidents that are our responsibility. The second one is a tick bite that led to Lyme's disease for one of our employees, and that's actually RID or reportable. So any tick bite that leads to Lyme's disease, we do report as a RID or, so we've done that. We don't get very many of these that actually lead to Lyme's disease, but in this instance, this was an employee who is fine. They got swift treatment, and they are. But what it does do is it highlights how prevalent ticks are, how prevalent Lyme's disease are. For employees and for visitors, we do a lot of work proactively around warning both employees but also visitors through our comms around the risk of ticks and how to sort of manage that. And our staff member identified that they had the tick bite, went straight to the doctor and got it treated, and didn't suffer any particularly adverse symptoms as a result. But again, it's becoming every year, I think, more of an issue for our outdoor staff to certainly be aware of. And then finally, we had 2 staff who went out to a planning enforcement case who were met with a very aggressive owner. The details are in the paper, but it highlights again that potential risk to our staff who do go out into the field, both sometimes as lone but also working as twos, but also that we need to really ensure that we have the right sort of risk mitigation in place for high risk visits, making sure people don't go out on their own to those, and that they're effectively managed. Certainly lone working as well, where we have that across a number of areas of the workforce, that we have the right buddy systems in place and things of that sort. So an incident like this just highlights why we go to the extremes we do to try to make sure that staff going out on site are as protected as they can be. And then finally, the action plan in there, progress across a number of areas is highlighted in the report. And just to note that both myself and the head of people are new in this year, and we've been doing some work of our own as well around the service and just sort of gauging what we think the priorities for next year need to be, and we'll bring that as part of the action plan for next year at probably the next FRASC agenda.
Thanks, Peter. Any comments? Jane?
Jane? Just on the bike park then, because having been and visited it, I can see that it's a fantastic facility, but I can see that there could be problems. Do we have somebody who's a specialist in that area to inspect it, or is it one of our team, or have they had training or something, just so that we understand who's inspecting it, because of the fact it's a very high risk area, but a fantastic resource?
So we have a Dom who's our cycling lead, who is a very, very experienced cyclist, who is quite a large part of that, and actually there's a project this year to further develop the pump track, which he's leading. But he works very closely as well with the ranger on site and the visitor centre staff and officers as well. So it's inspected on a regular basis by the ranger and occasionally by Dom, but it's very much like Dom's experience within that as well. So yeah, we do have in-house experience around cycling, but a lot of it is around making sure the surfaces and things like that aren't breaking up. In particular, they haven't got vegetation breaking any of the surfaces around it. And there's some of the that's the things that can happen and need to be managed immediately that they do. So the ranger is very sort of au fait with being able to manage and look after that side of it. We've also got the quarterly visitor centre inspections now, which I go to with the staff. Not saying that I can't ride a bike around the pump track, but we do visit the pump track as part of that, to walk round, make sure that the condition of the surface remains as it should do, that all the signage is where it should be, etc. So we do have those relevant checks in place.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, I also, I mean, obviously accidents happen, and we have the people in place, and training is essential for first aid providers and whatever. And obviously with the increasing numbers, Peter, no doubt we've had to relook at that and make sure we've got enough all the things that would be associated with these sort of like accidents, or so possibly it is part of what you do, retrain for first aid. And I mean, that's part, the more increased accidents going to be, the more increased you've got to think someone's going to be needed. That's right, is it?
Yeah, we train the visitor centre staff in first aid. In fact, after we had an incident on the pump track, I think it was either earlier this year or the end of last, where somebody actually impaled themselves on the handlebar. We did report that as part of the health and safety report. After that, we did increase the volume and what we have in our first aid kits as well at Sutton Bank in response to that. Because of the extent of that kind of injury and the amount of things that you need, we've now extended that. So again, some of it is about just looking and learning from things like that. And we have had one or two, breaks of limbs within these accident rates as well. But there's a lot of accidents there. A lot of them are grazes as well. So we really are reporting everything from a grazed knee up to a broken hand or a broken foot. But you're right, as cycling provision is on site, the risk of injury certainly increases, the risk of incidents, which we can see here, and the importance of looking at that for any trends and things like that is really, really important. So we need to keep an eye on it.
Yeah. Right, next. Jim.
Just very quickly on the tick bite. I mean, it's been a good year for ticks if you're a tick, a bad year for ticks if you're being bitten by them. But it's really important that the Lyme's disease is increasing. I know there's been 2 or 3 other cases in North and it's fine if you get treated in time, but if you don't, then it's quite serious and you don't ever get rid of it. So my question was actually about the sort of volunteers and our outreach people. Do we have a sort of an information pack as to what to watch out for in Lyme's disease? I mean, you can get bitten by a tick and 99 times out of 100 that's that, but if you do get Lyme's disease, you need to know what to watch out for and get treated pretty quick.
Yeah, we do a lot of work in our comms around tick awareness, both internally and externally, around the risk of ticks, but also absolutely what to look out for in Lyme's disease and what to note. We do that with staff, we do that with volunteers, and we also, I think, put it out on external comms as well for members of the public visiting our sites. But you're right, this year has been a very good year for the ticks themselves, and it's becoming more of a risk. So yeah, I mean, I think there's no harm certainly in reviewing our comms to all those areas and just making sure they are as they should be. I'm confident they are, but I don't think it does any harm to review them again.
Yeah, I knew they have a negative message, but know what to look out for.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks for that. That's great, Pete. I'm feeling a bit about these ticks now. I'm being a bit shivery. But sorry, Clive.
Thank you. I'm just going to go on about the two people which went to this site to have a look around. The police were involved. Did the police take it any further? Because it is an abuse and this should be stopped. We shouldn't allow it. It should not be allowed.
I understand that the police visited the individual to discuss that their behaviour was very unacceptable and came to an arrangement, I think, just to let him know that if it happened again, it wouldn't be tolerated. So I think certainly they took it further in that regard. But not beyond that, but I think certainly saying and making it very clear that that behaviour was completely unacceptable.
And is the national parks quite happy with that? And they are. Right.
Thank you. Right, no more questions. So we got the report. Thank you very much, Pete. And we're on to the next one.
Yeah, Treasury.
Thank you.
So halfway through the year, we just bring a Treasury update. There's nothing too major in here, so very quickly, no prudential indicators have been breached in the first half, and there's no change to the lending list either in the appendix. And the key three figures probably in there are the average cash balance, daily cash balance in the first half of the year of 8.2 million, which has generated interest of £187,000 at 4.64%. So some really good numbers in terms of interest generation. Again, we invest our money with North Yorkshire Council through an agreement with them, and they're the returns that they're generating on their funds for us.
Okay, unless members have got any questions. Sorry, unless members have got any questions, we'll note that. Thank you. Thank you. I don't have any. Oh, sorry, George. Sorry. I get some better glasses, I think.
Yes. In terms of any other business, I have something to say. Ordinarily, it would go into the compliments section, but because the complement section item on the agenda is in the private session, I thought it's important to highlight it here before we go into private session shortly. And I thought I would just highlight that I think a few weeks ago it was mentioned that a number of officers from other national parks were going to come to Helmsley to spend some time with the team here in the North York Moors. So one evening, as I was walking by, I remembered that they said that they were staying at the youth hostel here. So I knocked on the door of the youth hostel, and they were all gathering there, enjoying their evening and drink. So I had the opportunity of meeting with them and chatted with a few of them. So I thought it was just to highlight how wonderful it was that we had national park officers from other national parks across the country coming here to Helmsley and sharing their experience and knowledge with us and having a training and workshop together. So I thought that was very positive. Am I right that the next time, this is an annual thing that happens, and therefore it's going to be some few years before it happens again in Helmsley?
So I think I know my team reported back that you very graciously called into the youth hostel. So thank you for doing that, George. So we played host this year to a joint conference of the learning and engagement and health and wellbeing officers. Those groups move around the country. They try and get together face to face once a year. Last year was in Loch Lomond and the Trossachs for the learning and engagement group. So it will be another national park for those officers next year. However, I'm sure the North York Moors will be playing host to another officer group at some point in the next 12 months. There are about between 30 and 40 of these communities of practice of different professional officers across the national parks, and we try and ensure that we, certainly from our point of view, we think it's important that our colleagues have got the time and space to spend time with their counterparts to learn from each other and improve how we do. So in this instance, we were delighted to be able to host them for 3 days. I think it was, Joel, in total 4 days, in fact. Well, by the time it was two groups. So yeah.
No, that's fantastic.
But thank you, George. That was really
That's very
appreciated.
positive, and the more we host of these things and share experiences is positive, and also it shows that the youth hostel in Helmsley is such a fantastic facility, given that it hosted this wonderful group.
Well, thanks. That's really, sorry, James.
I think it's a good point, but I just wonder at some stage, without making a meal of it, whether our sort of both English and UK collective working arrangements might be an interesting presentation or discussion for members, because it's stuff that Tom and myself do a lot of, but and clearly, you know, without banging on the door of the youth hostel, it wouldn't let me in, George, I have to say. You wouldn't have known about it, would you? So I wonder if at some stage, either for an update or something, you know, a bit of an infographic about how we're doing it. And there's a few things at play about you know, how we might change governance or this or that at national level. So it would be useful for me and Tom to have a discussion with you, because it would give us more confidence to know what we're looking for when we go into that arena.
Very happy for the minutes, and also I know we're recording them. Very happy to take that as an action for a members update. I think you and I, Jim, tend to assume that there's widespread knowledge amongst our members about how it all works. I'm sure there isn't, so I'm sure we can do that. Yeah.
Well, George, thanks for raising that. So I'm sure they had a great time. Obviously, the probably stayed a bit longer than they should, but that's great, and it's a good initiative. Well, any other things we want to fetch up on any of the business? We'll close the meeting.
You've got to go into move private business. Heather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to close the public. I want to close we'll close the public meeting, and then we'll go into the private.
You just need to move the recommendation to exclude under item 16.
Okay, so I move the recommendation to exclude the
members
only in favour.